Well, $10 a day childcare has been a game changer for many families, but the increased demand has also come with its challenges.
Our search was for licensed facilities, and what we were hearing pretty much across the board was, anything from our wait list is 70 pages long, or we have over 300 people on our wait list.
So coming up on the show, we're going to hear from parents about their experience trying to find daycare. We'll hear from the biggest childcare provider in the province, and we'll find out how Saskatchewan compares with other provinces when it comes to availability of affordable daycare spots. As always, we want to hear from you. What effect has $10 a day daycare had on your life? And if you've been trying to find a spot, what has that process been like? Call right now, 1-800-716-2221, or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, Janelle Wallace and her wife are packing their bags to move back to Saskatchewan. They have jobs, a house, but no childcare for their daughter who is not quite 2. I spoke to Janelle earlier.
Hello.
So tell me a bit of the story here. When did this whole search for childcare begin?
Yeah, so we've always had in our minds we wanted to move back to Saskatoon. So a little less than a year ago, we had kind of out on a whim just put our name on a couple wait lists just to see. But then when we decided we were going to purchase a house in December, we started our search a little more seriously. A lot more seriously, sending out a lot of emails, reaching out to friends, calling different licensed facilities, and really hoping we could land something for May.
And what kind of response did you get on the other end of the line, or response to your emails?
Yeah, so our search was for licensed facilities, and what we were hearing pretty much across the board was, anything from our wait list is 70 pages long, or we have over 300 people on our wait list. A lot of them seem to not have room for like the siblings of kids that are already attending there so that they could be in the same daycare. And yeah, it was just kind of the same across the board, which was very surprising and frustrating at the same time. I could also sense the frustration on kind of the facility as well, knowing they probably have to keep turning people away, is my sense.
Yeah. So where does this leave you? Because you're trying to come back fairly soon, right? And if you don't have care, then what?
Yeah, we have the luxury of having been in Saskatoon previously, so we built up a community that we are now starting to lean on more to kind of expand our search out. We kind of had to change up our expectations on what we were looking for. And so, yeah, hoping that, a friend might be able to track down something that they're aware of, or they know a friend of a friend who can highly recommend something. But yeah, it's definitely not in line with what we were originally thinking. But if that's the route we have to go, then we don't have too much option.
Why was having a licensed spot important to you?
For us, when you're sending your child to childcare, especially for the first time, it's essentially, to us, it feels like a stranger. And so knowing that we're sending a child to somewhere that has regulations and standards to meet was pretty important to us. Obviously, the cost savings as well is important, but that was the other aspect of it for us.
Mm-hmm. So if you're hearing back that people have wait lists 70 pages long, I've heard of places that aren't even adding names to their wait list right now. You're talking years before you could ever see your child getting into one of those spots, hey?
Yeah, totally. That's exactly it. It is discouraging. By the time you could potentially get in somewhere, you're in a position where you might not even be looking for child care anymore, depending on the age of your kid. So yeah, it's tough.
How does this compare to childcare maybe you had where you're living right now?
Yeah, so we're currently in Alberta, in Edmonton, and our experience finding childcare here was, for us, drastically different. I know it might not be the case for everyone in Alberta, but we, essentially had our pick of 3 licensed facilities within a 10-minute drive of our house, which is just not the case I'm finding in Saskatoon right now. Like, we bought a house more central, and we're starting to need to look at places across the city, well across the city. It didn't really take us so long in Alberta at the time when we were looking.
So do you think you'll find something?
I'm hopeful. We have some leads, hopefully from friends. It seems like there might be some spots available in day homes, but that's not a guarantee yet. So we're just going to keep forging ahead. And I really don't think we'll get into anything like a licensed daycare at this point. So yeah, it is what it is.
What do you think you've learned through this process, and any of that learning that you want to share with others, whether that be just other parents or anybody who's making some decisions around childcare? What is the message that you'd like to get across?
Yeah, I mean, start your search as early as you possibly can. I mean, not everyone has the luxury of being able to start their search, 2 years in advance, but just like, keep your mind open to all the opportunities out there. Maybe join like a Facebook group. There was a couple in Saskatoon that I joined, where you can kind of put your situation out there and people will comment who are childcare providers. So yeah, lean on your community if you have one, and have people reach out for you too. But yeah, just good luck.
We've heard stories of people deciding they can't go back to work because they can't find childcare.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of facing a similar situation. Like, we have the luxury, like, my partner is in healthcare and so has some flexibility to reduce hours until we find something, but it's really not sustainable beyond a month. So, I mean, that might be something we look at too, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I wish you luck, Janelle. I wish you luck with the move, and I wish you luck on your search for childcare. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Janelle Wallace and her wife and their child are moving to Saskatoon in a few weeks, and they are searching for childcare. We've been hearing from other parents as well about how the $10 a day daycare has affected their situation. Our producer, Nicole Huck, has popped into studio to share some of those perspectives. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Alicia. So Crystal in Saskatoon told me that the $10 a day daycare was a game changer for her as a single mom. She said daycare used to be about $800 a month for her child, and she says it's now $217. So just to give you some perspective on cost, Deanne in Regina told me that we got subsidized home daycare, which has been an incredible experience. We've never paid more than $217.50 for our 2-year-old. I'm hoping I can get into a center close to our school when he's 4 or 5, so that's pre-K or kindergarten, but that's looking like it won't happen. The wait lists are over 3 years long. There just aren't enough spots in these big centers. Contrast that to my daughter, who started in a day home and moved to a center before she turned 2. I paid $600 to $850 until she started a before and after school program. So her before and after school program currently costs more than her brother's full-time daycare. And she says that the centers have gotten impossible to get into, which is frustrating.
And then we heard from Carly, who writes, we opted to stay loyal to our private provider, but she announced her retirement in the fall, and now every wait list we've added our name to has been at minimum a year wait or more. Sigh. No subsidy for us, and now on the hunt with no availability near our local schools.
Tori told us, it was a life changer in my house. We fortunately made it just in time. We got a spot in a center a couple of months before the first reductions took effect. Then when it started reducing down to about half price, it was retroactive. So technically she didn't pay full price for her 12-month-old ever. Then it took a while to get all the way down to $10, but when it did, it was right when she had bought a house and they were still working to sell their previous one. So it's a time when they really needed that money because they had 2 mortgage payments and a daycare fee. So she says it wasn't easy getting our daycare spot, though. She applied at nearly every center in the city as soon as she knew she was pregnant. And she says, I can easily see how it makes a difference between one parent working and not working.
Jacqueline writes, it definitely was the difference between me staying at home and going back to work part-time. It was not even remotely feasible to work part-time and have 2 or more kids in daycare full-time because there are no part-time spots available. And then Megan says, the $10 a day has allowed her to work at a nonprofit.
Cecilia told us that I wish there were more spots available. We aren't in a licensed place, so our costs didn't go down at all. It's a cheaper place, so the dollar amount is probably comparable, but we don't have the quality or consistency of a licensed place. And Crystal says that some rural daycares are full. There's just not enough capacity for everyone who needs a spot in her hometown. So because she told me that, I reached out to friends who live in the village where I grew up and asked what the situation was there. And I was told that there's one daycare in the community and it isn't subsidized. And then the next town over also has a daycare, but it's full and very hard to get into. So, we have listeners all across this province. I know that parents are busy. If you have kids in the background, that's okay.
Yeah, we don't mind.
We don't
Sounds
mind.
like home.
Yeah. So just, especially if you're in rural Saskatchewan, we'd like to hear from you today. So what does daycare look like in your community? And for all those caregivers out there, how has $10 a day daycare changed things for you? Call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca, and I'll go back to where I belong.
Yeah, answer those phones.
Exactly.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
That is the CBC's Nicole Huck. She's the producer here on Blue Sky. I'm Leisha Grabinski, and you're listening to us on CBC Radio 1, 540 AM across Saskatchewan, 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina, and streaming on the CBC Listen app. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been following some coverage in other places. Childcare centres in Ontario and Alberta say they are at risk of closing, and it's all because, they say, of how daycare centres there are funded since the $10 a day childcare was brought in 2022. But things operate a little bit differently in Saskatchewan. So to find out more, we have reached Steve Compton. He's the CEO of YMCA Regina. The Regina Y is one of the biggest childcare providers in the province. They have 250 staff and operate 12 daycare centres in Regina and Moose Jaw. Steve Compton is in our Regina studio. Hello to you, Steve.
Hi there.
Thanks for being here. I don't know about you. I'm sure you have been, because we've been hearing about the problems daycare centres in Alberta and Ontario are having to stay open. I find it a fairly complicated thing. So I'm hoping you can help us understand what problems they are facing that you are not. What makes us different?
Yeah, in Saskatchewan, when the $10 a day was announced and rolled out, all licensed providers went to $10 a day. And the funding from the government of Saskatchewan was available to operators. So the model is very different between provinces. We've talked about with our team that there's consistency through that, and there's been grants and funding that's helped at periods of time in areas of inflation. But the $10 a day to the parents was a wonderful announcement. One of the challenges is that the $10 a day doesn't represent the true cost of childcare, and operators like ourselves are watching carefully as the second phase of the federal and provincial agreement rolls out.
And what are you watching for specifically?
Well, when parents are paying $10 a day, childcare doesn't cost $10 a day to provide. So when you had some of the parents in the comments just before this, talking about $600, $800, $1,000 for infant care, that's reflects the true cost of operating. And what happens is that any time that we would have traditionally in the past been able to adjust or increase fees, that is only provided to us now through the form of grants from the province. And the $10 a day in Saskatchewan was universal to all operators, and every operator is different in size and needs. But I think what you'd find is that our ability to adjust to increase in inflation, cost of operation, facilities, and wages is challenged in that, and we rely almost exclusively on the grant structure with the provincial government.
How thin though, or how closely are you watching those dollar figures? Like when I heard that in Ontario, a significant number of YMCAs were at risk of closure, they're operating at a loss. How tight are the numbers here in Saskatchewan? Well,
it'll vary from location to location, and that can be affected by things like lease cost and cost of operations or rents and those type of things. But right now we're staying above the trouble line. But we're watching in a few areas. We're watching for how operators like ourselves, or everybody in the province, all operators, will be compensated going forward. That, is it indexed to a cost of living? Is there? We've received some grants for restoration of centers this year, but over the long term, how will capital be addressed? And certainly we opened a new center in Regina, and we're very in tune with the significantly increased cost of building out any new centers as well.
And who are you looking for money? Because I think there might be some confusion. This was a federal plan, but the provinces are really responsible for executing it. So who are you looking to for money?
We've been communicating with our contacts in the early years branch with the Ministry of Education and advocating for our position in the sense that we need to keep pace with costs. Because if we don't, the piece that we manage in the middle is the staffing, it's the operational. Any of that funding can't compromise quality or the service to the community and the parents. And what we're watching for is what's the long-term structure look like. In the early rollout of it, the consistency was appreciated. Wages have improved through grants to the early childhood educators, where in a sense they become careers, not jobs. But is that sustainable over the course of time? And what we're watching is what we can expect on that basis going forward.
So hearing from that Saskatoon mother, or soon-to-be Saskatoon mother, she's living in Edmonton right now, struggling to find a spot in this city, you must be experiencing something very, very similar in Regina. I mean, what's your wait list like?
Well, I updated it before I came here. I just had checked in. We have 1,800 families on the wait list in
1,800?
In Regina, and 600 of those are asking for infant care, which we have a very small number of spaces. And in Moose Jaw, it's 300 families looking for care. And again, about a third of it is infant spaces. And the affordability of childcare certainly improved, and we were able to grow a little bit by an opening of a new center in the last year. But generally, there just simply isn't enough spaces for the amount of people that are interested in accessing them.
People who have been following this closely have said to me, this was expected, that we knew that supply was not going to meet the demand. But just what was your reaction when you started to see the names piling up on that list? Well,
we're very appreciative for the affordability for families in the community. I think one of the challenges will be is the building out of new spaces. And if it's a brand new build, the current funding model for capital would not meet that requirement to be able to build out. So operators like ourselves, like the YMCA here, are looking to other opportunities where there's private sector involvement or other partners that might be able to come forward. And then we've had inquiries from rural saying, hey, could you open a childcare in this community an hour outside of Regina, for example? And there's an economy of scale that has to be reached for an operator to actually be successful. And then when you have things like escalating food costs and energy costs and all those type of things, we're mindful and watching and advocating for our sector that, these are adjusted for the true cost of quality childcare and not necessarily to income replacement.
Steve, I have more questions for you, but I just want to go to one of our callers that we've got on the line, a busy parent. So Christina in Saskatoon, hello to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We sure can. What is your story?
So my son is special needs, so he has autism. And so that adds a whole nother thing about this licensed daycare, because he can't just attend like a regular day home, which we'd be willing to pay extra for, but he needs one of those licensed facilities. Because he would thrive with an accessibility grant because he's currently non-speaking and using an AAC device. So in order for him to participate and for me to go back to work, he would need to get into a licensed day home or daycare center. I've called, I think, everyone in Saskatoon. Either they won't even put him on the wait list because of his needs, or they say that their accessibility spots are full and they don't know if there'll be a space for him.
What position has that left you in, Christina?
So currently we're losing income because I'm not able to go back to work. And we've been on wait lists for the last 2.5 years. And I've just been calling and trying to advocate for him and trying to advocate for special needs children in this province. And it's just heartbreaking.
Well, I appreciate you picking up the phone and sharing your perspective with us. It's important to hear that, and I wish you the best. It's tricky. Everyone I talk to who's struggling to find care, I really feel for you. So thank you for calling, Christina.
Thank you so much.
It's Christina calling us from here in Saskatoon. Steve, since we have you in studio, I do want to ask you how this is affecting a daycare, an early childhood education center like yours, because you also offer before and after school programming.
Yeah, the current challenges and disruptions affect the child care centers to some degree, where school age care is provided, at the start and the end of the day. But really, where we've seen the impact more so is with our before and after school care, because if there's a closure of the schools, or like tomorrow with the lunch hours and a reduced school day in some locations, we're not able to operate within those facilities. So we have 21 before and after school locations across Regina and Moose Jaw. So anytime that there's a citywide or community-wide piece, we're not able to operate. And that's certainly impacting us in terms of the frustration to parents, but also with our staff, and some economic impact as well.
Yeah, because parents aren't paying if their kids aren't going that day. So does that mean a loss for you?
It does. If there's a full closure of those services, for example, it would be a loss of $2,500 a day for the YMCA.
And parents are calling you, wishing and asking, like, hey, any way I can send my child to you all day?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, from a parent's perspective, I can appreciate their frustration, because a lot of times we'll have staff that rotate between care in the morning, and the parent that was just on the phone with the enhanced accessibility supports, the one-on-ones, we juggle staff to be able to meet that, because we've had a lot of parents ask why on the planned professional development days throughout the year we can staff, and why can't you staff similarly, if it was next Friday, for example. It's just that availability of staff, staying in our ratio, the number of educators per child, and the parents are saying that's an us problem. We're working to see what we can do in terms of some day camps, short notice day camps, those type of things to help meet the need.
I want to ask you about educators, because that is a big piece of this, right? Finding people who are qualified to offer early childhood education. How is that at this point?
It's better in the areas that we serve. We had a really difficult period of time where there was simply not enough educators available to operate at full capacity. So some of my colleagues across country that you mentioned where there's closures, some of that is related to staffing as well too. The availability of trained educators to being able to be there. In Regina, we've been fairly fortunate. We do have challenges from time to time in staffing, and in Moose Jaw, and that's the size of the community and the competition for those roles, because it's they're in high demand.
It hasn't always been an easy job. It's still not an easy job, but the pay has been an issue, and whether or not people can stick it out for a career, that has been a challenge.
It has been, and one of the things that we did appreciate with the way the implementations happened here is that your educator level 1, 2, or 3 is how it's structured. The government provided wage top-ups that were fairly substantial that really improved the level of compensation. We're appreciative of that, and we hope that that's sustainable and continues in future.
Where are many of the educators coming from? Are they people who are here and they've gone through the schooling here? Are you able to recruit internationally at all? We've
been working through the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program and bringing people from out of province and that have come to Canada. Particularly when I mentioned Moose Jaw, we've been utilizing that program to bring educators to the community, and we'll continue to do so when needed. Regina has settled for the time being, so we're not seeing the same acuity that we were seeing, 6-8 months back. Much better situation, and I'm hoping that people see this as a career. And one of the things is not babysitters in that sense. That they're professionals, they're educators, they're in the classroom and working in play with the children to help develop as best as possible.
We're hoping people will share with us their story of finding daycare. What difference did $10 a day daycare make in your life? Are you searching for a spot? How is that going? The number to call is 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us at bluesky@cbc.ca. We'll be speaking to the Executive Director of the Child Care Resource and Research Unit in a moment. Her name is Martha Friendly, and we'll get her perspective on how things are going in Saskatchewan and right across the country. Our guest right now is Steve Compton, CEO of YMCA of Regina. Jocelyn sent us an email. She writes, "We were lucky enough to get our daughter into the university daycare at the U of S after being on the wait list for a year. I'm currently in graduate studies part-time. To enroll your child, you must be a student. She's now 3, and in 4 months, I will be finished my program. To keep her there, I have to now apply to a new program to attend at the U of S because there's no room anywhere else. It still makes more sense financially to be paying tuition and the licensed provincial rate than the cost to send her to a private, unlicensed home daycare. At least I will be well educated, I guess." That comes to us from Jocelyn. You can email us to bluesky@cbc.ca or call us 1-800-716-2221. Steve, how desperate are our parents sometimes getting when they're trying to get into the YMCA?
Two thoughts on that. One is that there's a gentleman that would bring his daughter to our door faithfully at our news center once a week, imploring us to open a spot for his daughter. And he would talk about that he was a newcomer to Canada and his ability to work opportunities were hinged on that piece. And those are hard conversations to turn someone away on that basis. And the parent that just phoned in about the enhanced accessibility grants, we have a number of children in care that have more specialized needs. And that's a difficult challenge as well, too, is that there's what we would argue is a somewhat outdated funding model of that, and the road to getting that grant can sometimes take time. It requires supporting professional evaluations, a lot of different things. So when parents have children with special needs, I think, the difficulty ratchets up as well.
When you said you had 1,800 people on your list, how many of them realistically will end up with a spot, and how many kids will end up in kindergarten without actually getting a licensed spot?
Probably quite a few. I guess I'd say that, if in an average year, if there's a turnover of, say, 10% on our spaces, we'd have 75 spaces that might be in play at any given moment in time versus an ask of 1,800. So we're only able to meet a very small proportion of the folks. And I know that when parents do this, we had one parent, they were very quick to share that once they found out they were expecting, they applied to every child care center in Regina.
And what does it take to open new spaces?
It's one of the pieces is there's two parts to it, but the first piece would certainly be the available capital to develop a new space. If you're fortunate enough to be able to retrofit into an existing facility somewhere, it may be a bit more affordable, but the current grant structure doesn't meet the cost for construction. And what's going to happen is that operators will have every intention to open, but they don't have the financial ability to do so. And the other piece is workforce. It's always workforce. If there is a very quick expansion of hundreds of spaces, you'd need many, many educators. And so that has to be more measured and methodical, and we got to know that what we're recruiting for and when we're recruiting for it. And we would very much want to meet the community need by opening new spaces, but the two big pieces would be the financial model, which I mentioned, and making sure you've got a skilled, trained workforce.
So despite all of these challenges, is this still the right direction to be going in?
I would suggest it is. What I would say is that the affordability for families was a huge step forward. We're very much in support of that. And when we went through that celebration of $10 a day childcare and it became more affordable for the families with care, we're very excited for that. And the opportunities that opens up for parents to re-engage in the workforce and be able to access childcare affordably. But on the flip side of that, we're watching with caution how this rolls out, because many of the challenges that are topical and hot in other provinces could become challenges here depending on how the Saskatchewan government puts forward their program in the coming years.
Okay. Well, it's been interesting talking to you, Steve. Thank you so much for being one of our guests today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Steve Compton, CEO of YMCA Regina. Anyone who's listening, if you've got kids, small kids, you probably have a story related to this. It is a topic of conversation in my circle, that is for sure. So if you have the time, we don't care if there are kids in the background, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You're listening to us on CBC Radio 1. That's 540 AM across Saskatchewan, 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina, and streaming on the CBC Listen app. Now, listening along is Martha Friendly, the Executive Director of the Child Care Resource and Research Unit. She joins us right now from Toronto. Martha, hello.
Hello.
You've been listening. You're probably itching to say a few things. So what's top of mind after you've heard some of these Saskatchewan stories?
Well, I guess two things. One is that some of these same stories could be in other parts of Canada, and some wouldn't be. So, I just want to, without repeating what anybody else has said, I really want to emphasize that this program was initiated by the federal government, but it is a program that all the provinces and territories have joined. And it's within provincial jurisdiction to roll it out. So I think that sort of came through a little bit. And when I look at Saskatchewan, when I put Saskatchewan in perspective, what was it before? What was the context? What was Saskatchewan doing before? You can see that those things still carry over, because this new program is, it's, as you said, it's not just about affordability. That was the first important step, and has pretty well addressed in Saskatchewan to a large extent the affordability problems that parents experienced across the board, across the whole country. Saskatchewan is one of the provinces that reached its goal early, reached the goal of $10 a day a couple of years early. And I think the important thing that I want to point out there is that Saskatchewan now, the fee for childcare, licensed childcare everywhere, is $10 a day. It's not variable anymore. So when you compare that to Ontario and Alberta, what we're still seeing is reduced fees, but with a very wide range of fees. So some parents are paying a lot more than others. So that means that it's much harder for some parents to cover the higher fees, still higher fees, and also that it's harder to keep track of. So I think that's a real plus for Saskatchewan, that it reached $10 a day early. I want to point out one other thing about Saskatchewan that's important to keep in mind that affects what happens in the future, is that Saskatchewan has always historically had a low coverage rate of childcare compared to other provinces. So it's actually fewer children percentage-wise in Saskatchewan there's a space for. And like other provinces, it's always more difficult for infants and toddlers, because there have always been fewer spaces for infants and toddlers everywhere in Canada.
I have so many questions to ask you. I want to put out our numbers just one more time, because people do still have time to call 1-800-716-2221 or email us bluesky@cbc.ca. Our guest right now is Martha Friendly, Executive Director of the Child Care Resource and Research Unit. So I have a few questions top of mind. I keep thinking about Janelle Wallace, our first guest, the parent who's been living in Edmonton, moving to Saskatoon, can't find a spot. In Edmonton, was able to get, had three options. So was it a smart move to reduce the price this quickly if a lot of people who now have kids between the age of 0 and 5 can't seem to get a spot? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what would have been the smart move was to actually have started working on expansion earlier, at the same time as the move to affordability. I think that in any situation where you're trying to build a childcare system, which is what we're trying to do, expansion is going to be the thing that takes a lot of effort, and it needs more lead time. So all governments, all the advocacy people were urging governments to actually take action, get geared up on expansion earlier, but they were really occupied with figuring out how to reduce the fees. So there's a disconnect, but expansion is a lot harder to do. So, I guess what I want to say is I don't view this as a lost opportunity, but something that governments need to take a hold of, rather than waiting for the YMCA or any other nonprofit operator to put their hand up and say, I'm here and I'll open up a childcare center. What you get out of that are childcare deserts, lots of places where there's nobody's put up their hand. You get a lot of inequity about the neighborhoods where childcare is located or isn't. And so this is something that we've been urging all governments, provincial governments, to basically have a much more publicly led, planned, like a planning model of where childcare is needed, when it's needed. I think the point that the YMCA made about capital money is majorly important, is that some communities have no buildings to put childcare in. Even if you're in a city, there's probably no place to put childcare. So it's a matter of looking for opportunities. Childcare in schools is one of the reasons that there is a lot of childcare in Ontario, because there have been policies for 20 years to build childcare into school spaces, things like that. So I would say that it was the right direction to reduce the fees, because you needed to move ahead on that. But what's needed is now the action on expansion and also the workforce, hand in hand at the same time, because you can't expand without the workforce. We keep using the metaphor of the three-legged stool. If you want a quality childcare system to cover everybody, you need to support it with all three legs, with affordability, with the enough availability of spaces in the right places, and with qualified workforce that you need in order to make it work.
Were these growing pains expected? Like, what's happened in other countries that have tried to introduce a publicly funded early childhood education system?
Yeah. Well, here's one thing. Canada's, if you talk about OECD countries, Canada is one of the last. Actually, Canada is not a pioneer in any way in this. So you can look to see what other countries have done. So here's the lessons that we've learned: is the market doesn't work. It has to be publicly defined, publicly managed, mostly publicly delivered system.
Why? And I'll just jump in quick with a why. What is there any value in having private operations?
When you say private, you mean businesses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, having studied this for many years and looked at all the research on this, I don't think so. It's not a business. It's an issue in all countries, even countries that have well-developed child care systems like Norway is trying to control that part of it at this point, because it brings in all kinds of unintended consequences, like private equity, global private equity companies capitalizing on, Canadian public money. So I would say that it was a very smart move that the federal government took to say that expansion will be primarily public and nonprofit. And I would say this is one of Saskatchewan's advantages, is that it has never funded for-profit childcare. It has very little compared to some of the other provinces, like Alberta, for example.
And do you know why?
So,
why that is? Why we're different?
Saskatchewan, I think it was historical. I think actually it was when it was introduced. I think there was a co-op tradition, but Saskatchewan's the only province that has never funded for-profit childcare. And I and many of the other experts that you could talk to view that as an advantage, that not-for-profit childcare and publicly delivered childcare are really what have made these systems that you can actually count on, where the profit motive isn't the main motive of delivering the childcare. It's what's made it work in countries where that have developed childcare systems.
I'll put out the numbers just one more time here for folks to call, 1-800-716-2221. You can email us bluesky@cbc.ca. We are talking about $10 a day daycare. And I said at the start, it's like a dream come true for the folks who do have a spot for their child. But for those who don't and are searching, it can feel like a bit of a nightmare. So today we're taking a bit of a pulse check on this policy. And our guest right now is Martha Friendly, Executive Director of the Child Care Resource and Research Unit. Martha, I wanted to just ask you a bit more about how Saskatchewan has low coverage and these daycare deserts. How did that end up being the case here?
I think some of it is just historical. I mean, I can remember when development of childcare was not favored in Saskatchewan. Maybe this goes back 30 years, where other provinces were more rapidly developing childcare, as I said, in Ontario and schools, and it just didn't happen in Saskatchewan. I think there was always an assumption, which turns out not to be true, that rural communities did not want or need childcare. But each province has its own history. I think the other thing that's operating in Saskatchewan is that there are parts of childcare that aren't licensed in Saskatchewan, like part day preschools, and a fair amount of the programs after school for school age children. I think that actually makes a difference in kind of the overall supply. And I guess the other thing that I should point out that you might not have thought about is that Saskatchewan is one of the 3 provinces that still has only part-day kindergarten for 5-year-olds. So whereas in some provinces, most of the 5-year-olds for at least the school day would be in kindergarten. And in Ontario and Nova Scotia, it's also all the 4-year-olds, and that's growing. But it's the interplay between kindergarten and childcare that is, on the other hand, Saskatchewan's the only province that has 3-year-olds in pre-kindergarten. So again, what I'm saying is that the provinces and territories all have variations, and some of them are advantages and some of them are not advantages in this case. But I would say as a summary that every province, including Saskatchewan, really needs to figure out how to have expansion happen more rapidly and more evenly and in a planned way, and
including
to address the workforce issues,
including kindergarten. The conversation around kindergarten full time, it's expanded a ton in Saskatoon. Saskatoon Public is offering it in way more schools. Just at the start of this year, they added a number of schools, but not all. So that's definitely a topic of conversation.
It plays a role. It plays into the childcare question, is what I'm saying, and different ways in different provinces.
I want to ask you about smaller communities, and you had mentioned to me that some rural municipalities have taken this on. What can you tell us about what might be happening in communities outside of the major cities?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting aspect in Saskatchewan, which has very small rural municipalities, like they're quite small, and numerous. And there have always been some number, and I don't know what the number is now, that have actually supported childcare by contributing in space or helping to organize it and that kind of thing. And there's a couple that actually deliver the childcare. They hold the license. There's a couple.
That's so interesting to me.
They have for some years, actually. And you could sort of go back and see why that happened. I believe it had something to do with rural economic development, but my understanding from talking to Saskatchewan colleagues is that there are a number of small rural municipalities now that are interested in childcare and exploring it. And this is something we're seeing across the country. But it was identified in Saskatchewan as an area of interest from small rural municipalities. So, I should put the point that it is quite possible for municipalities to be the deliverers of childcare, the operators of childcare. This is not numerous across Canada, but it is the norm in countries that have a lot of childcare, that have developed their childcare systems, for municipalities to be one of the big deliverers of childcare, operators of childcare. And you see some bits of that in Saskatchewan. Very interesting.
It is interesting indeed. I was speaking with Martha Friendly, the Executive Director of the Child Care Resource and Research Unit. We got an email from a parent that I'll share with you. My child was born during the pandemic and as a result has not had the same opportunities to develop certain skills and social interactions that other children may have had. Due to this, my child requires additional support and attention to thrive in a daycare setting. We found a licensed daycare. Unfortunately, it seems that the daycare provider is unwilling to accommodate these needs for a child that has been in daycare for over a month. They have expressed a preference for children who are more independent and seem hesitant to work with us to provide the necessary support for my child's development. I believe that every child deserves the opportunity to learn and grow in a supportive environment. They would rather if we can get a diagnosis for autism or ADHD so they can access more funding from the government. I don't blame them. Everything is very expensive and they are just trying to survive. So that comes to us from a parent. You could keep those emails coming, bluesky@cbc.ca. Martha, just a couple more questions for you. I don't know if you want to weigh in on, a couple parents have written us or called us today expressing concerns and challenges that they face with children who might have additional needs. Is this program addressing some of that? Is that part of the conversation that you're having with other people who are following this quite closely?
Well, of course, it's part of the conversation, but like a lot of other things, it isn't being given. There's not enough resources yet for this to be given its proper attention. And I want to point out that this is a concern for people who advocate for childcare. It's one of the principles of the program that it's supposed to be inclusive and include everybody. And I should also point out that in at least one province, funded childcare centers are not allowed to turn away children with disabilities. So this is a really interesting question about when does it become a right and part of the program, and shouldn't programs, I think she was talking about unlicensed childcare, but certainly licensed centers in Saskatchewan can be funded to include children with disabilities. It's just that there's not enough of it. I mean, really, and it's another area that needs to be further developed and thought about.
After having this really fulsome conversation about this, are we heading in the right direction? Was this the smart move for the federal government to introduce this and put us on this path?
It was. I can't tell you how long overdue it was. It was a very smart move. I would say that it's important that it not be colored by it's a failure. It wasn't. Nobody ever assumed there would be enough childcare by this year. That's not to say that the provinces don't need to get on with developing it, but and if you look at any other country that has successful universal childcare, it takes years to develop this, but it has to be done through public policy. Again, you can't just wait for people to turn up and say, I'll develop it, because they might not turn up.
Martha, it's been great having you as a guest today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Martha Friendly, Executive Director of the Child Care Resource and Research Unit. If you didn't get a chance to call in, but you've got thoughts swirling, feel free to put them in an email for us. You can email us anytime at bluesky@cbc.ca. You could also call our talkback number and leave a message, 1-800-661-7540. I'm Alicia Gravinsky. You've been listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1. Tomorrow, pottery is having a moment. Seth Rogen is all over Instagram sharing his creations, and there's a new CBC show, The Great Canadian Pottery Throwdown, that's creating a buzz. So on the next Blue Sky, we'll be joined by a couple of passionate Saskatchewan potters who will share their love for the craft. And we want to hear from you. Have you taken up this art form? If so, why? And does coffee really taste better in a handmade mug? I'd say yes. Join the conversation over the noon hour. That's tomorrow here on Blue Sky. Have a great afternoon.